Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Paul Smith, Smith. He's just published a book in 2025. Full title of the book. If you're watching this on X Rumble or Rockfin, you will see the cover of it. And the full title of the book is Cruel and Unusual Punishment, a memoir of the psychological realities of federal prison. And these are kind of current events, recent events. He was in federal prison during COVID. And this is his first book, and it's been published through the great publishing house of Wild Blue Press, who I've had a lot of their authors, and they're almost always great books and really great guests. So I'm delighted to have him. Paul Smith, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For people who may not have heard your name, story, or maybe not familiar with the book, maybe you can talk about your background, the writing of the book, the researching of the book, and then we can start from there.
Okay. All right. So let's start with who I am. I was born in Detroit in 1964. In 1970, my parents moved, my siblings and I up to a rural area in northern Michigan. So I was raised there. So I grew up in a country setting. I have a bachelor's degree in economics and a PhD in clinical psychology. I spent most of my adult life in the field of psychology. I worked in various settings, a hospital setting, university at Wayne State University, outpatient clinics, community mental health, and in 2007, I opened my own private practice clinic. The practice began with just me and another clinician, and I had a half-time staff, administrative staff, and it grew quickly. Within 4 years, I had 4 locations, and I employed, or we contracted with 65 plus clinicians and admin staff. So it just boomed. My clinical expertise personally, I have a broad, I had a broad training in psychology, so general psychological issues, but I was especially good at evaluation and diagnostics. And I would work with very chronic and severely mentally ill patients, those with, let's say, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or chronic mood disorders, and those that have co-occurring substance use disorders and mental illness. So in 2018, and this was during a time when I had a lot of personal crises going on, and there were issues going on with the business as well. I committed healthcare fraud and I was indicted. And I made a devastating decision during a period of time that was very desperate for me at the time. I pled guilty. There was no trial because I was guilty. I was
But you
sentenced
were
to
you were indicted, right? You got indicted on some issues of Medicare or Medi-Cal fraud. Is that right?
well, it was healthcare fraud. So it was basically I billed for services I did not render. So
I mean,
that's the definition of
right,
fraud, right there.
right. So, but this is not that. I mean, it's not that uncommon. Sadly, I think there's a lot of that. Fraudulent overbilling is not that uncommon. Sadly, I think.
Right there, it does occur. In fact, if you manage your own healthcare business, there is a constant kind of fight back and forth with the insurance company getting paid for things, and there are services you do render and you don't get paid for those. But in this case, this was me intentionally frauding. So I mean, I committed a crime. Um, and I was sentenced to 51 months, and I served 28 months of that sentence. I went into prison March 2020, which was the COVID pandemic.
Right. It was right there at
And
COVID.
then, yes, it was right there. And after prison in 2022, I was released and I completed my probation. Everything's done. But I lost my license. I could probably get it back if I worked at it. It would take me for a very long time. And at this point, I'm okay. I am okay. I don't need to go back to the profession. Although I'll tell you, the profession was very good to me. Very honorable profession. Um, Met a lot of excellent, uh, I would say, clinicians and educators in the field. So when I got out of prison, to make ends meet financially, I started taking down old buildings, primarily barns, taking them down and reclaiming the material and selling it. And that's kind of what I've been doing for over the past 3 years or so. And then I began writing. So, and while I was in prison, I was taking notes on my experiences, taking a lot of notes. In fact, when I finished the sentence, I had probably about 800 pages of
Oh,
stuff that I
wow.
wrote
Wow.
down.
Wow.
And a lot of these I was mailing home because I didn't want to lose them while I was in there. I was just mailing these notes. And sometimes I would write, when I had access to email, I would write down my thoughts and so on. And I would email it to someone and then they would print it off and keep it for me when I got out. So I knew that I was going to write this book while I was in. And in fact, it occurred when I was in solitary confinement. When I experienced that, I said, "Man, this is unbelievable what I'm experiencing here." And I wasn't the only one. And this was during COVID. There was a lot of lockdowns. There was a lot of solitary confinement, a lot of maximum security conditions during the COVID pandemic in the Bureau of Prisons. So most inmates were experiencing this, and it was harsh. I will tell you. We can get into that.
Well, they say
So
that sensory deprivation or isolation is a form of torture. I think that either the Red Cross or United Nations. I'm not sure. So I don't. It's the shoe, right? That's you were in the shoe, right?
the shoe. That's right. That's right. So, and I was gonna. That's actually a whole chapter in this book that I wrote. And there are many times when I'm locked down throughout the book, but I have one chapter that speaks about my early experiences in the shoe and what I was experiencing. And I did experience some perceptual distortions, basically hallucinating. I was seeing things that just weren't there. I was hearing things that that was just made up in my mind. My mind was creating this, and I have, if you don't mind, I'm going to read just a little passage
Yeah,
that
please do.
covers
Please.
that particular experience.
Feel free to read at any time on any of this too. But that is actually a common thing after a certain time in either sensory deprivation or isolation, people will their brains, it's not normal. It's not good for people. They start
That's right, and it's interesting that you know that because not everybody does know that, but it
well,
is common. It's a common phenomenon that does occur.
yeah. No,
And I
they did it during a lot of the mind control experiments in the 50s. I've done a lot of reading and a lot of other shows on that. So
yes. So here's a passage. After 27 days, I was experiencing a moderate degree of indecisiveness and indifference. I had difficulty making choices, so I made no choice. I laid in the bunk and stared at the walls and ceiling, getting up only for food trays and using the toilet. I had not showered in the past 7 days. My sleep-wake cycle became flipped, awake all night, asleep during the day, then flipped again. But day and night did not matter anymore. When I was awake, I did nothing. I did nothing because there was nothing of value, no stimuli, internal, external, available or strong enough to prompt a decision. It was on my 29th day when I first became aware of experiencing transient perceptual distortions and illusions. At first, I perceived sights and sounds that would normally evoke immediate and strong curiosity, but in my current state, the level of curiosity was lacking. In other words, I was hallucinating, but I didn't react to it because I was just so depressed laying there. An example of such illusion distortion, I saw an insect crawling on the ceiling, legs moving, the bending a long, thin body back and forth, surveying the area during travel. Then suddenly, the insect disappeared for a few seconds and reappeared at the very spot it began. I heard my name being called from somewhere outside the cell down the hallway. I heard the keychain clinking, as often occurs when a CO is walking or in motion. But there was no external sensational link to these perceptions, or there was a gross misperception. They were distortions of a distorted mind. So that afternoon, I laid back in the bunk. I opened my eyes slowly, moving my head on a roll of dirty laundry. An overcast day darkened my cell in shades of gloomy gray. The rank scent of urine and sweat lingered. My lungs labored to draw in the thick, pungent, stale air. I felt a dull ache throughout my body, a stiffening, which came from weeks of no movement. I became nauseous, as from a hangover. I felt a transition, the becoming of something else, something less than. Not only was I disconnected from others by space due to incarceration, but I had become separated by species or kind. In other words, what I was saying is I felt like an animal, and I felt myself slipping into that over time because I was just in this deprivation, and being treated without kindness, and it was rude and rough. The chasm caused a loneliness beyond anything I previously contemplated or experienced. I was unsure about myself, except I was certain I was no longer healthy. So this was when I went into prison. The first day that I was in prison, they give you a health screening. Everyone gets one.
Is that physical and mental health?
Yes. Well, during that screening, I was sitting in the examination room and the chief psychologist walked in and I knew who he was. He recognized me.
Wow.
We had went to school together. So he's saying, he did what he needed to do. And he said, I need to let the warden know because this could be a conflict of interest. Well, 8 days later, I was transferred out. And that began this odyssey of transfer for me. And I went through 8 different facilities to get to my final destination.
Wow.
Over
Why did they
over
transfer you so
13
many
months.
times?
Well, number one, that's how the BOP does it. You don't go from one facility to another. You often go to others, and you're sitting there in a holding unit for a period of time, and then you get transferred. Well, I went from Duluth, Minnesota, eventually I went to Sandstone. I went down to Terre Haute, Indiana. I flew Conair out to Oklahoma City. I was there for about 3 weeks, close to a month. Then I flew into Atlanta, took a bus up to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, took another bus over to Lewiston, Pennsylvania, stayed there. And then I ended up in McKean eventually. I stayed in the medium security facility for a while during quarantine, and then I went into the minimum security camp. And that's where I was just released from there. But it took me 13 months to get there. And during COVID, it was especially difficult because everything shut down. The BOP, you saw it out here in the real world, the civilized world, let's just say. you guys were locked down, and the world wasn't ready for it. So you had all these lockdowns, everybody scrambling to figure out what they need to do to reduce the spread, so on. The Bureau of Prisons implemented what they call protective measures. And so they had it. They had these protective measures and they implemented them, and that's what they were supposed to do. But they knew it wasn't going to work because the prison system, in order to stop the spread of anything in there, you have to lock everybody down. There's no movement and there's no coming in and out of the prison at all. And initially, they did stop all inmate facility to facility movement, but they couldn't stop it ongoing. Eventually, they loosened it up a little bit. They slowed some things down. But you had staff that would go home and then they come back into the prison setting. And, I believe, and a lot of us in there believe that that's how it was spread in the prison, is that you have staff that go home and they interact with people wherever they're at, and then they come into work, and all of a sudden you have 95 inmates that test positive for COVID. And I was on a bus in Terre Haute with 95 people, inmates, who went from the minimum security to the penitentiary, and that's where we quarantined. And we were there for 3 weeks. And you're locked down. You get out of the cell twice a week for 10 minutes to shower each time. And that's it. So you're in your cell and there's nothing there. There's no TV, there's no internet, there's no, and I spent periods of time where there's no book, paper, pencil, or anything. So you're just sitting in a cell and you have nothing. And you may have a roommate, you may not. And you'd think that a roommate may make it easier for you, but it doesn't, because now 2 of you are sharing an incredibly small space. It just makes it, you feel more claustrophobic, let's just say. You're confined. And there's not a whole lot you talk about. If it's somebody that you don't know, you may share some things, but a lot of times it's just, you're just staring at the walls.
Wow. Did you catch COVID while you were in jail?
I did.
What was that like? I mean, did you find it was a severe case of illness, or how did that happen?
I had probably a moderate degree where I felt the chills and I was coughing and I had that horrible headache and I lost my smell for a period of time. So those earlier variants of the loss of smell was a common symptom. So I had it probably after, I would say it was probably in maybe September or October of 2020 is when I was sick. And so yeah, you don't get anything. You sit in a cell and you rot.
You just write it out, huh? That's all you got. You
write
didn't
it
get
out,
any medicine. Wow.
No, there's no medicine there. There's no medicine.
And this is your first incarceration in your life, right? This
That's
is your
right.
kind of first
That's
thing.
right.
You're maybe a little older, so
Yeah.
probably, yeah.
Yes.
You're in the civilized world for 5 decades, right?
That's right. That's right. So this book that I wrote is about punishment. It's about all the punishments. In fact, I have a chapter in there that is the punishment. And there is a conversation that I have with other inmates. We talk about prison. What is the purpose of it? What's the value of it, if there is any? And we talk about all the different punishments that a person goes through. But you have to understand that when it comes to when you commit a crime, the punishments begin sometimes even before the crime, but you suffer all the consequences. When I was indicted, the whole world knew, at least in my head, I believe that. Everybody that I knew. And the shame and humiliation, which was very intense. I never felt anything like that, not even close to what I felt like. Now, that's a punishment for what I did. And that's a natural consequence as well. you feel ashamed for what you did. And there was also the loss of a career, the financial losses. I lost everything. My marriage was shattered. My family was scattered. So you suffer a lot of consequences as uh, as a result of you committing the crime.
Right, so it's
And
not just the fact you're in a building with 4 walls or something like that. There's
no, it's not.
yeah,
You're suffering all kinds of consequences before you even get in there. In fact, the period of time between indictment and the time that I actually entered prison, which was 20 months, was one of the most miserable times I ever had in my life by 10 times, right? And then I went in prison and I experienced some things that were even worse. But it was really bad. So you're already receiving the punishment. And I will tell you this, that in terms of a deterrent, just that first 20 months of indictment and having to go through all that, that was enough for me. I never wanted to experience anything like that again, ever. Okay.
interesting.
It was bad. So, but those are the consequences. So you're in prison and then you suffer the prison punishments, and that's deprivation. You know, you have to live in an environment that is unhealthy. It is unhealthy. It's a, I would say, a savage existence, a culture. So
Right, you're in there with some people who aren't very pleasant, right?
you're in there with a lot of people that aren't pleasant, and so what you learn, and I'll back up a moment here. So early on, let's go with the first day. The first day that I was done, when I finished my health screening, they told me to go to the cafeteria and go get a meal. So I went and grabbed my food tray and I sat down at a table and I started eating. And I noticed a guy on the other side of the hall get up and he started walking towards me. And I'm thinking, man, this guy wants to talk to me. And he stopped and he did. He says, "You're sitting at a black inmate's table. This table here and all the tables along this wall are for black inmates. And the tables on the other side of the hall, against the wall, are for Hispanic inmates, and all the rest are for whites and whoever's left over. So you don't have to leave today because they know you're new and you don't know what you're doing. But tomorrow, come and sit with us." So I didn't know that. I had no idea that that stuff was going on. I mean, you hear these things. You may watch some movies that show, you know, some of the prison culture, whatever. But I'm being faced with it straight out, right? So, and I looked and I go, yeah, there's not one white inmate along the wall there. So I'm just like, I'm facing this. This was my first experience of what's called the prisoner code. So you learn that there are 3 sets of rules in there. You have the institutional rules. The BOP has their rules and their policies, and they're written out, so on. Then you have the rules that are the staff rules. So they may or may not overlap with the institutional rules. But and some staff are different than others in terms of what they choose to enforce and what not to, and they may even have their own little rules that they try to enforce or let you know you're not allowed to do this or that. But then you have the third set, which is the prisoner code. And if you violate the BOP or the staff's orders or their rules, you get punished by being put into solitary confinement or something. You could even lose your good time. But that's not true when it comes to if you violate the prisoner code. What do? They can't put you in the shoe. What they do is they intimidate and they use aggression. They'll get violent with you. So you learn that. So you're in this environment where you got to follow certain rules. And if you don't, you're going to get hurt. And, you learn that and you try to navigate these 3 sets of rules. And I tell you what, it's not easy, especially when you're being transferred to another facility where they may have a whole nother set of things going on.
Right.
So I was not in one prison for a long period of time to where you just kind of understand how things are in that place.
Did you find that
I
the
was,
racial segregation was the same at all the different prisons you visited?
you say the racial or the
Well, you said that like
level of
there's black
enforcement?
seating. Yes, there's black seating, Hispanic seating, white seating, but you moved through many different prisons. Did you find that that was the same? The kind of unspoken prisoner code and rules were similar to
Well,
each place you went to?
it's not the same. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but it's not the same. When I was in the Terre Haute camp, you could sit at a table where there were other races. You could, but for some reason you couldn't at the minimum security in Duluth, Minnesota, which is the first place I went into. And but when you get into the higher levels of security, you get into the low, the medium, and then the high. The higher up it goes, the more segregated it is, and the lines are they're drawn, and you follow them. So what happens is you have a lot of people from those higher levels of security that work their way down as they're getting closer to getting out. They work their way down to these lower levels, and they bring a lot of that attitude with them, a lot of the, well, let's just say those experiences with them. And you know, some of them are acting as if a medium security was a medium, you know, or a high, and it's different. It's different. Um, there's less restrictions and there's a little bit more freedom. But the people who work their way down do so because they've learned over time that their risk level has reduced. They don't have any incidents. They don't fight. You know, I'm not saying they don't fight, but they don't have anything that was, let's say, a formal incident, let's say, on their record. So, but but you saw it a lot. I mean, when I was at solitary confinement the first time, which I was there as a holdover, so I was there at, let's say, day 10 of me being in prison. I was in solitary confinement as a holdover in Terre Haute, and there was an incident where this is a medium security where the guards were bringing a black inmate to put him in a cell with a white inmate, and the white inmate says, "You're not bringing him in here. There's no effing way that he's coming in here." And the guard said, "We better not get any problems from you. You're going to have a hard time here, you know," and so on. He says, "F that. I don't care. He's not coming in here." And the black inmate said, you know, swearing, you know, "You cracker," and all that back and forth. So there's this yelling going back and forth. But the guards take the black inmate out of there, and they didn't push the issue. There was no incident report. There was no, you know, major discussion about it or anything like that. And in fact, I think that the guards knew they had made a mistake. You just don't do that. Okay. And you have to understand that in prison, there's no affirmative action, there's no DEI, there's no you don't have that in there. Okay. And if you try to enforce it, if you tried to enforce that in there, you'd see violence. People would get hurt. So pretty much the races are segregated, and that's just the way it is. And
Right.
and
Did did George Floyd kind of enter into play in the prisons? The event that was
absolutely he
May.
did.
Oh, it did. Oh, wow. Okay.
He did. When he was in, there were a lot of us that were upset because I tell you what, not because of what happened to George Floyd. I mean, what happened was, I mean, the man died. Okay, he died, but it was the rioting that we saw afterwards. All of the rioting and the violence, and nobody was going to jail. The prosecution, there wasn't a whole lot of indictments going on with all of that stuff going on. I know they were talking about protests and so on, but we saw crimes that were being committed. And there were a lot of guys in there that, I mean, like, well, we're in here for doing stuff that's less than what they're doing.
Right.
So it was
Right.
just this lawlessness that going on. And it was like, but in terms of the racial tension, they actually locked us down for that too. When there were
Interesting.
major issues going on in society where there were there were times during George Floyd, there were maybe some rioting going on. They would lock us down for a while just to keep the tension down, just to make sure. There was a time I know that there was a gang related death outside. So I think it was in LA, and it was it was I don't know why it was just spread out all over national news and everything like that. The BOP locked us down for 2.5 weeks for that,
Oh,
because there
interesting.
are there's gangs inside, and that could have caused a lot of violence inside. So, and I would say that the gang streets, the inner streets and the gangs, that gang behavior, affiliation, all that, you see that on the inside in the higher levels security. So you just see it replicated here in the prison system. Now, let's imagine that somebody has done 12, 15 years in prison, living under the conditions that I mentioned, and there are many, many more, okay? You live under those conditions, you become what they call institutionalized. Basically, what that means is that you internalize that prison culture into your everyday view, reaction to things, so on. It's become second nature to you. Now you have somebody that has been exposed to that for that period of time. Now let's release them from prison and put them into society. There's no way that person's going to be able to function in society. There's no way. You cannot live by the prisoner code out in society. It doesn't work. Okay, so these guys are coming out and they're disabled. And in fact, if you look at the stats, there's a significant portion, not saying most, but there's a far more than the general population of people coming out of prison, and they get on federal disability because they just can't
Oh,
function. They can't
interesting.
function.
Interesting. High recidivism too, right?
So
Like
it
a
is
lot
an
of them get
environment that, say again.
said there's a lot of recidivism too. They end up back in jail.
Yes. And I think partly because uh, what was going on outside to a large degree, especially when you're dealing with the anything gang related, or if you have like drug activities, where that was their main source of income and livelihood, and they had been doing that for most of their lives. They end up going back to it. There are many in there that had multiple uh, sentences. They came back 2, 3 times. They were in prison, and it's sad. And another, I'm thinking about, that's how they made the living. It was off the street there, right? So I met people in their 50s that had never had any W-2 income. Many of them.
Wow.
They never
Crazy.
they never held a job. Their
Wow.
whole existence was off the street selling stuff, whatever that might be, whether it was drugs or something else that they were doing. But so I'm like, wow,
That's incredible.
you're
They were selling
52.
drugs. They were selling drugs in there too, right? There's still traffic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Drugs, alcohol, there were cell phones. You could, there were many different things. in there. So you have to think that, especially with the higher levels of security, because the security levels, I mean, the security is pretty good in terms of, you don't hear too many people escaping. And they do, for the most part, society is protected because the violent criminals are locked down and they're not able to just get out and escape. It does happen from time to time, but it's very rare. But to get something into the prison there, I can't imagine they can get it in there without help from a staff member. There's just no way,
Right. Do you think the
especially
staff
at those
members
higher
were
levels.
do you think they were getting a little kickback or part of anything that was brought into the jail?
It must be. It must be. It must be they were getting something. So there were busts in there that the merchandise was probably 20 grand worth of stuff.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
15 cell phones. You had they had a bust, and what they did is the guards, they had it in they had a control center where they had glass windows, and they had these counters, and they put all the paraphernalia out there for when the inmates walk by, they could see all the things that they were trying to smuggle in, and it was their way of just showing, hey, this is what you tried to do, but we got you. And you could see all the bottles, half gallons of alcohol, liquor, um,
Wow.
the phones, certain foods.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Pretty clever. So get buys and all this stuff. People make their own, like they have videos online of people making prison food with what they get from the commissary or whatever commissary. But
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. Yeah, I had some excellent meals that were made with with a clothing iron.
wow,
They
interesting.
had, I mean, they were cooking up meals with whatever. You had the stingers where you would plug something into the wall and you'd put the wire into the hot water and it would boil it. And these things that you would see people doing. And so it's just,
It's
it's wild in there. I have to say it's extremely unhealthy.
did you
But
it's a unhealthy, I mean, it's interesting as somebody with a background in psychology to be in there and go through all those negative states, paranoia, anxiety, fear response, fight or flight, right? Like it feels like
yeah,
you're almost in fight or flight state constantly. Would you agree with that?
yes, you feel on guard all the time. There are times when it's not as bad, but you feel it all the time. You're on guard. So, I mean, I had even since I've been out, I cannot I don't like it when somebody stands behind me, or uh, when I'm in a room, I like to face the doorway. I don't like my back to the doorway. You know, this wasn't who I was before I went in. And
Do you still have kind of, I mean, I guess it'd be like sea legs, like coming off a boat and going to land. Do you feel like you had something like that when you got out of jail and got back into kind of ordinary American life?
well, something changed for me in there, and I've been trying to describe it, just even to write it down. But when I went in there, I got into a few fights, and I stopped. I wasn't afraid, even in times when I should have been. I should have been afraid because it was potentially dangerous. But for some reason, when I was in the situation, I was fearless, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And I think this was just part of this change that I was going into. When I was in there, I was just so miserable and depressed. It didn't matter. Um, I talk about a fight that I was in, and me and this guy were yelling at one another. And I remember having this feeling of like it didn't matter if I won or lost. He could throw me through a window, or I could bash his skull, and both would be satisfactory to me. I just wanted some sort of violence. And it seems strange to say that. It almost, you sound like a psychopath, but I was changing in there. And it was a matter of the environment. You know, you survive. You're put in situations where if you don't assert yourself, they're going to take advantage of you. Many times there was chest bumping and other things just over a TV and other things. So you're on guard, and it's selfish in there. It's about reputation. It's mistrust of any authority, and it's might makes right. The stronger, the more, I guess, you got some inmates there that need to be in control, and they try to enforce that on others. And that's what this one guy was trying to do with me. And I just told him, "Who the hell do you think you are? You do your time, I'll do mine." And he didn't like it. And we got in a fight over that. So I was regressing. I was becoming something that was not human. It was less than human. The environment itself is harsh, but also how you're treated and how you're viewed. There's a chapter in there called The Enemy. And I was called the enemy, and I felt like the enemy. There's a difference between a prisoner and an enemy, inmate. You're a citizen that goes into prison, and you still have all the rights of anybody else. Okay, you have all those protections. But an enemy doesn't. You don't have the same protections as a citizen has. Let's say in war, or it's different. Well, when I was in there, I didn't have the rights that other citizens had. I mean, there was there was violations of my rights right and left in there. Uh, Being able to speak with my attorney, there being confidentiality between my attorney and I, safety. You know, I'm supposed to be safe, and you're supposed to be treated with dignity and respect. That doesn't happen. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's so pervasive in there. When there is an act of kindness or respect, you feel it deeply because it's like something that's just so rare in there. And you know, you appreciate it, but it just doesn't occur that often. So and I'm talking about this harsh experience. It is harsh. It is punishment. People commit crimes and they should be punished. Okay, but we need to ask ourselves, what are we trying to achieve here with this? Do we want straight punishment? Do we want to just punish people and that's it? Is that what prison is about? If it is, then let's just admit it as a society, that we want people to just go in there and we want to punish them. Okay. Now, if you're trying to deter people, you know, that's one of the effects of prison. It's supposed to be that, you know, we'll send them to prison if you do these crimes, and we're going to try to keep them from doing it again. Or
They used to be called reformatories, right?
well, you would have, well, then you would have corrections, and corrections, they still call it corrections, but then there is the idea of rehabilitation. So they're in there, and okay, let's try to rehabilitate in terms of basic stuff, you know, work. If there's any types of serious chronic mental health issues or whatever, you try to address those, or social issues, you try to address those the best you can. So when the person gets out, the person has something that helps them succeed out there. And it's just not happening in there. The BOP has on their website all of the different programming they have. They say that they have these things that inmates can do, and if they do them successfully, it's supposed to help rehabilitate, and they reduce your sentence if you finish these programs successfully. Well, they don't have many of the programs that they advertise. They don't implement them consistently. They don't have any real educators in there. When you're talking about training people, even with the basic trades, you don't have people in there that are qualified to train. So you have these programs that are just they're poor. There's poor outcomes. Uh, the ones that do well tend to be related specifically to the staff members' characteristics. That person likes teaching, maybe like the idea of helping others, and they may make a successful training program, but that's on that person individually. Across the board, it doesn't happen. So there isn't any real rehabilitation going on there. And if society wanted it, then they need to speak out and say, hey, we want real rehabilitation here, and we need to look at funding it correctly and staffing it correctly and making sure that this is done. But I don't think society wants that. I'm not convinced of it yet. And it could be that society just doesn't know what's going on in prison. This book is part of that. I'm trying to take the person in the prison with me and saying, this is what's going on. You send somebody to prison, this is what they experience. You know?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. They don't know. It's not like in other societies, the prisons aren't like the US. They're not, I don't think, as harsh and cold and like in Finland or some of these other places. Like they just look like apartments. They don't even look like jails. So even the way these look is cold and gray and forbidding. It's like part of the element of it, the psychological element. It's just even the buildings themselves are usually very brutal.
They're neglected. They are. There's not a whole lot of money put into them when they're first built, of course, but the maintenance is poor, and over time they just get rotted out. I was in cells that had, you could see the chip paint, and it had maybe 14 layers of paint on it. Some of that probably had lead in it, but I'm just saying that you could see the chips all over. Lewiston was like almost, if you were placed in a dungeon, I think that would be what would it feel like.
The equivalent.
And
Wow,
what it
that's
looked like. Yeah, it looked like it and felt like it. It was gothic. Even the architecture is goth.
wow. Yeah, I mean, it's really wild. I think that there's a lot of things people don't know about these people shoved in these jails. They don't understand what's happening. You only served half of your sentence, right? How did that happen?
Well, I did finish a program while I was in there, and that allowed me to reduce my sentence down significantly. I was
Was that
able
the
to.
RDAP? Was that it?
Yes. Yep. And that reduced my sentence by 12 months there, and then I had qualified good time on top of that. So I was able to get out serving half the sentence, which is when I went in, my goal was to spend the least number of days in there as possible, and I looked for any possible way to getting out early, and I tried to do whatever I could in terms of program. The RDAP was the program that they have in there. But if you read the book, you'll see that there's some flaws to that program. However, I think the science, they do have good research that backs it up, and the theory of it and even the practice of it can work in certain settings. But in a prison setting, it gets a little tricky because the people who are implementing it are also the ones that will pad you down and they'll lock you up. So there's a conflict when you're talking about treatment, and some of it is therapy, group therapy, so on. You're not supposed to disclose things outside the group and so on, but yet they get information. They listen in on the inmates' phone conversations, so on, and will use that information to discipline them. So it's kind of it is a conflict, and I think that conflict may reduce the quality of the treatment in there at times. So, but in the book, I describe some of the dynamics in there because you're supposed to hold each other accountable, and what ends up happening is there's fighting that goes on, and it gets violent
Gotcha.
because you're supposed to hold each other accountable, right?
Right. Paul, we are at the 50-minute mark.
Okay,
Is there anything you'd like
sure.
to add or anything I missed?
No, I think we covered it.
Okay. Your book
Yeah.
is all 5-star reviews, so people really like it. And it's available on Amazon now, right? Kindle, audiobook, paperback, and hardcover, right?
That's correct. And if anybody wants to, I have social media. I'm on Facebook, Paul Smith. Paul Lucky Smith on X, Truth Social, YouTube. You can see some of my material on that as well.
I will put links to that. I do have X. I'll put links to your YouTube. Anything else that is in there, I'll put links to your book as well. But it's really interesting to read through. It's a current contemporary story of this. I mean, I think it's
Absolutely.
really important. The fact that you have a psychology background, I think, provides insights into this as somebody who's been in there, not somebody like an academic or something like that. But thank you so much for your time. Congrats on the book. Again, the full title is Cruel and Unusual Punishment, a memoir of the psychological realities of federal prison. And again, the author is Paul Smith. So, Paul, thank you for your time. Stay there.